collective security partnership for the sub-region and particularly for the Indian Ocean. On this topic, we not only confirmed our previous commitments with the Indian determination to continue in the framework of contracts already signed, the combat aircraft, submarines, and we also defined new partnerships, a strengthened strategic partnership, military exchanges of intelligence, satellite cooperation, and a framework cooperation with regard engines for fighter aircraft. So a new stage has been completed which matches the geopolitical conditions. India is an important ally for France, and France must also ensure the stability of this part of the world to avoid any form of hegemony that could unbalance the situation. And I will give you more details later on. The second pillar of our exchange of this trip was obviously the bilateral relationship. This is based on a number of fundamental issues. The first one are our cooperation in the field of energy, international agreement, renewables, nuclear energy. We have also progressed, and the two are consistent with our strategy for reducing CO2, which India has approved. When you want to decarbonate, you have to foster renewables, but renewables are intermittent sources of energy, so we also need nuclear energy, which allows electricity or power to be generated without any interruption. So we have signed new funding by the French Development Agency of energy projects. Earlier, we inaugurated a solar plant in Uttar Pradesh. It's a project in which has been partnered by France, by the ENGIE French company, 600 megawatts. We're now rising to 100 megawatts. This will create jobs for 800 people. And in addition, we have also extended our nuclear cooperation in civilian nuclear. We have set the basis for an industrial agreement which will be finalized in the next few months by the operators concerned, which will make it possible for EDF, the French electricity utility, under conditions of negotiations, to deploy 6 power stations, nuclear power plants, EPR power plants. Beyond energy, and in perfect consistency with our energy policy, we have a joint strategy for smart cities and new forms of mobility. India has launched a major smart city program. In this country, which is a continent, is the fact that in the next few years, the number of urban dwellers will go from 410,000 to over 820 million, Indians will be living in cities. We have major international groups that are well equipped to provide the needs of smart cities, new towns, in terms of transport, maintenance of transport, water treatment, and management of smart cities. So we have signed agreements with 3 cities. We will be going beyond those 3 cities. We have launched major projects in terms of mobility, financed by the French Development Agency, which involves several French operators. We will have a new high-speed train, which will also contribute to these new forms of mobility. So on this issue, France is one of the strategic partners of India in terms of transport and mobility. We will continue with transport companies, and the forum which we concluded with Prime Minister Modi made it possible to focus on this issue. The third key element of our bilateral relationship are exchanges between individuals, between people in the field of education, culture, academic and research exchanges. There are many opportunities to be seized to go further. First of all, by developing the French language in France. There are 300,000 people who are learning French in India. We want to double this number. The Alliance Française network is very much alive, but we want to develop it. We want to strengthen the supply of schools, of French language schools in this country, and multiply the initiatives in order to arrive at 1 million Indians learning French. This means raising the profile of France and explaining what France is trying to do through the French language, access to new markets and to new geographical areas. And this is what I've tried to underline during my trip. In this regard, the attraction for France, the taste for France, which has been shown, is something important, which we will crystallize through the initiatives we have taken. To enhance the attractiveness of France also means strengthening our cultural and human links. That's why I have set ourselves the objective of doubling the number of Indian students coming to study in France. We have 5,000 Indian students, which is very low. Most of them go to Great Britain or to Germany. We want to double the number of Indian students, at least, to France. So in our French Grande École and in our universities, we're going to organize this, and we have signed a roadmap in this field. We have also defined a number of research partnerships, fostering exchanges between our entrepreneurs and researchers. We have launched a program for young leaders to identify Indian talent and to give them opportunities in France by facilitating their access to research work or for the development of their enterprises, of their businesses, a strategy to enhance France's attractiveness and to develop exchange. Culture and gastronomy are important. The delegation that accompanied me can bear witness to this, and I hope we will be able to go further. Prime Minister Modi was very positive in this regard, developing links between Bollywood and our French film industry, which will provide economic opportunities, which the Prime Minister insisted on a lot, but it will also help to develop two major filmmakers in the world who are not Anglo-American. Bollywood is very active, developing a lot of very imaginative products which are open to the world. And across the whole of Asia and in the Gulf region, the Indian cinema has a great presence. So we must be partnerships. We must be the partners of Bollywood, and we also want to develop French cinema in India by facilitating the shooting of films in both of our countries. Jean-Claude Carrière will be developing relationships also in the field of training in the art of cinema, and we will be, with Jean-Claude Carrière, developing a school in this regard. In recent months, we have also implemented a number of gastronomical projects, so there's great curiosity, mutual curiosity for our gastronomy. We are in a very major agro-business country, and French gastronomy is also a way of developing human resources, human relations, and economic relations. Finally, I wish to intensify economic exchanges through publishers, artists, writers, fashion experts were accompanying me. And yesterday I attended a workshop which made me more aware of Indian fashion. We need cross-fertilization and more intensive exchanges between our artists, between those who we have different kinds of imagination, and I think it would be in everybody's interest to exchange more on the subject of our different imaginations at all levels. We need to create bridges between our cultures and to create opportunities. So this trip has also enabled me to have many discussions and to convey clear messages showing our interest in what makes India what it is in its great diversity. I met Arundhati Roy, the writer in Delhi. We had a very interesting discussion on art and politics. Yesterday, I went to the Taj Mahal to see one of the great heritage, Mughal heritage of this Islamic heritage of this country, and we spent a lot of time in an emblematic city which highlights another influence on the civilization of India. So this shows the great diversity that exists in India, which is one of its strengths. And we must be humble when we tackle such a country because it's so diverse, it's so fascinating. France has a lot to do. France is capable of thinking about complexity, and that's why we are very well suited to work with India. Finally, yesterday morning, we launched the International Solar Alliance, which was launched in 2015 by India. Last June in Paris, when Prime Minister Modi visited me in Paris, we strengthened this International Solar Alliance, which brings together over 100 nations. Its aim is to increase solar energy, to mobilize more dollars, billions of dollars of funding. This is perfectly feasible if the signatories are capable of implementing concrete projects. We're going to open an online project funding system to multiply public and private financing. And with Prime Minister Modi, we agreed that following this summit and the summit of last year, we will also be mobilizing philanthropists and to get them involved as well. And this supposes mobilization in favor of training. We visited a training center yesterday, and also the development of research, of basic and applied research. Research is what allows us to reduce the cost of solar energy and of all other sources of energy. So this mobilization is very important, which is both effective economically and just from a social and climate point of view. So those, in a few words, were the issues which have consolidated our relationship, our ancient relationship between our two countries, and it has allowed us to start a new phase, perhaps to also develop closer links, personal, and to give a new visage, a new image of France, I hope. Now I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have. I can't hear you. I can't hear your question. This morning, on the boat, you were with the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, who is an Islamophobic politician, an extremist, a Hindu nationalist who has made speeches in favor of hatred, and he's the head of a ministry which actually persecutes people. How can you accept responsibility for this proximity? My answer is very simple. I am not here to... we are in the largest democracy in the world, here in India, and you can criticize countries for being dictatorships and say, I am not in favor of dictatorships and refuse to shake hands with them and so forth. But I don't share the ideas of the individual you've just referred to. But I'm here in a country that is a democracy. India has elected Mr. Modi after decades dominated by the Congress party, and at the last elections, a new minister was elected. I think it's not for us to give lessons to a sovereign power like India. So there have been some disagreements. I don't share the views of the gentleman you have referred to, but I was the guest of an elected federal prime minister, and this was part of our partnership. Good morning, Mr. President. I have a question which I will ask in English, if I may. La France et l'Inde ont fait
Solar alliance that they could work together to tackle climate change. Could the two countries shape global affairs, potentially with regards to the situation in Syria? India has great relations with Russia and Iran, two of the countries involved in the Syrian conflict, and Narendra Modi has great relations with Vladimir Putin. Could India be used as a go-between?
Écoutez,
we discussed all these questions with Prime Minister Modi, and we have a joint vision on energy, on the environment, on security, regional security, and we did discuss Syria. France is talking to Russia and to Iran. A week ago, I had a long discussion with President Rouhani and with President Putin, and the French Minister of Foreign Affairs last week went to Iran. So we don't need a go-between. We have been able to share our views. We have different relations with those different countries. They are geographically not in the same places compared to France and India. But France is talking to Russia as a member of a permanent member of the UN Security Council. We have to comply with those resolutions, of course. France is also talking to Iran. On several occasions, I have expressed my views on Iran and talked to Iran. So we have evoked the situation. We've discussed the situation. We have some convergence of views, but India is less involved in the Syrian problem as we are. Even though India's wish, as expressed by Prime Minister Modi, is to work on the collective security of the region. And that's his objective. And it is in India's interest also to build in Syria a political solution which is sustainable and not to give in to the dictators and not to concede anything to what is happening in the unacceptable humanitarian situation that is developing in the field. Mr. President, could you give us your definition of private life? There were a lot of people who accompanied you on your private visit to the Taj Mahal. Yes, we've had a 3-day visit to India, and as you can see, there's a great wealth of interesting things to see. So I think the most important thing are the strategic alliance. And yesterday, I was not accompanied by officials when I went to the Taj Mahal. I was on a private visit. There were a few journalists, but when you are President of the Republic, it's normal that journalists should accompany us, as happened in China when I visited some places with my wife and to try and better understand the country. Some people were probably disappointed not to be with us, but perhaps we don't want to close these visits to the media, and I thank the media for their good coverage of the event. Good morning, Mr. President. Regarding Russia and Syria, in an interview to Le Monde newspaper, François Hollande calls on democratic powers, including France, to act quickly to help the Kurds facing Turkey and the Syrian regime. Mr. Hollande also thinks we are too weak. We're responding too weakly to Putin's Russia. He says if Russia is threatening, it should be threatened in turn. What is your reaction to these comments? I will not react because in French democratic life, the roles are clearly defined. The President of the Republic has a certain responsibility, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs also speaks on behalf of France. And as we are a democratic country, anybody can make comments and take responsibility for his comments. Regarding Russia, France, since May 2017, has adopted a constant coherent policy without any complicity. We want to be effective by restoring the dialogue with Russia, which will, of course, is to try and make progress in our relationship. In recent years, in Syria, There has been a lack of dialogue with Russia, and this has been detrimental to progress. May I remind you, I don't think that the absence of dialogue has been able to make any progress. So we want a constant but demanding dialogue, and this requirement, I expressed it very clearly in Versailles last year, a red line regarding the use of chemical weapons, which I have reasserted many times. We are keeping a close eye on this. We have our own capabilities to act if and when we need to do so. We have also firmly asked for humanitarian convoys to have access. For several weeks in Ghouta, in eastern Ghouta, the humanitarian convoys have begun to arrive. We made this request to Mr. Putin with Chancellor Merkel, and these convoys are now beginning to enter. So under pressure from France, great diplomatic pressure by France, Russia, for the first time for a long time, did not place its veto on a UN resolution. So in the framework of this resolution, Russia has made concessions. Russia has allowed a number of ceasefires for several hours, and it has increased the ceasefires to allow humanitarian convoys to have access. So we've had some results, but these results do not rise to the occasion, do not meet the demands of the resolution. So we are calling on a major power that is a signatory of this resolution. It did not veto this resolution, to respect that resolution fully. And that is what Russia has to do today, and to fully comply with the resolution which it accepted at the Security Council of the United Nations with all our allies. That is the debate that we will be having in the UN in a few hours' time. The concessions made are not good enough in the field by Russia, but primarily by the Syrian regime and its Iranian allies. And that is what I said with Germany last week. So France requires action, discussions, and within the UN, we have deployed very active diplomatic actions, and we have obtained great diplomatic steps forward in the Syrian case. Now, what is the next stage? The next stage, if you want to, is to intervene militarily. France will not intervene militarily in the field in Syria. I say so quite clear. Many people who preach often preach military intervention decide not to go ahead and do so. I would like to go back to the plan for selling 6 EPR nuclear plants, which are carbonated. But what about the processing of the nuclear waste? Will France help India to process the nuclear waste? There are several issues that will accompany the deployment of these nuclear plants. These are all sensitive subjects. There is a debate about the democratic decision to build power plants. But regarding the processing of waste, it's different. There is a strategy for treating domestic waste, which India has to develop. France will be a partner. We have put in place what we call a circular economy. It's important for Indian cities and rivers with the French operators, major French companies and French startups are willing are prepared to participate in the strategy of India in the years to come. When you talk about nuclear waste, especially if you refer to the EPR power plants, there are different solutions. We are making progress. We have been a nuclear power for several decades. We are working on landfill solutions, but it takes a whole generation So if we prioritize factors and the time, we will not mix the two debates. The priority is to manage household waste and to the development of a circular economy which will support the solar policy, and secondly, to have a strategy for reducing CO2 emissions. You know the levels of pollution that exist notably in urban areas, which are due to the mobility and productive system in India. Prime Minister Modi has made commitments to change this, and the nuclear energy will be a component of the future energy policy of India, and that will lead to a debate on the treatment of nuclear waste, and that is a discussion which we will continue with India. Mr. President, you often mentioned Africa during your trip. Quite a few African leaders were present at the International Solar Alliance Summit. Will there be a bilateral Franco-Indian response to the issues of Africa? I wouldn't put it in that way. We did talk about Africa when I was in China a few weeks ago, and we are talking about Africa with Japan. So we have partnerships, a strategy based on partnerships. We have our own strategy, and all of this is part of a development plan which is necessary for Africa. What I think is really important, as I said in Ouagadougou a few months ago, we must all make sure that we can help African countries to develop their own strategies in the field of education and in the field of sustainable economic development. Those are the priorities which are essential for collective stability for Africa itself and for all the neighboring continents of which we are a part. It's an economic priority. It's a migratory priority. Whenever there are relevant projects, we will be supporting them. We will be participating. So we will have a country-by-country approach, but we do not intend to enter into any competition in this regard. That's not in line with French strategy. The red lines in Syria, you have just said that we have developed our own capabilities of action. Could you say a bit more about what these capabilities? If France has proof of the use of chemical weapons, what would France do? I will not give you the red lines in great detail, but we are permanently in touch with our allies in the field, and our allies, our international allies, and the intelligence services and security forces, to assess the situation. We are monitoring the situation very closely. If there is any evidence with our, as provided by our American partners, that lethal chemical weapons have been used, then we will do what the US did a few months ago. We will take the necessary measures to carry out targeted strikes on the sources, on the origins of that launched these chemical weapons. We have the ability independently to carry out those strikes and to quantify them if necessary. So the day a target has been clearly identified, and when the information has been confirmed, I will make the decision, and we have the capability of implementing them. The budget deficit will be slightly lower than planned, which means there will be a greater surplus. And there is the question of the issue, what will happen with the surplus? Are you going to dedicate it to emergency? I am not going to comment on domestic policies when I'm abroad. I will simply say that we do not have the luxury of discussing the redistribution of a surplus, because we still have a very high debt level and a very high deficit level. I would like to go back to the question of the EPR power plant. For 9 years now, there have been negotiations with India. In 2016, we had heard that the contracts would be delayed yet again. We've been told that there has has been a great steps forward towards the signing by the end of this year of the contracts for the EPR power plants. Is it is it credible? 36 Rafale fighter jets, the sale of 36 Rafale fighters. Can you confirm those sales today? Regarding the EPR power plants, nuclear power plants, great progress has been. In 2016, a roadmap was signed. Now we have an industrial agreement which goes as far as governments can go. So we have defined the volumes, the framework, and now it's for the industrial partners to engage in a debate. So commercial contracts will be signed in the presence of the heads of government. We have gone as far as we can at the level of governments, at intergovernmental level. So this is true that this agreement had been delayed, but now it's up to the industrial partners to work on the specifications, the production. India would like to make more plants in India, and there are also price issues, even though the state is the major shareholder of EDF, the French electricity company, but it is for EDF to negotiate independently. But we have clarified many litigious issues which had affected other international contracts, so progress has been made satisfactorily on an industrial level, and in the coming months I hope that we will be able to open a new chapter in the history of the EPR power plants, and that this contract, which is a strategic, I'm confident that this strategic contract will be finalized by the industrialists. But I'm not negotiating on behalf of the businesses and operators concerned. But we have done, as a government, we have done as much as we can to favor this agreement. Regarding the Rafale fighter aircraft, it's part of our strategic partnership, which I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. Scorpion submarines are important components of the strategic partnership signed 20 years ago, which we have strengthened considerably in this trip with a number of confidential issues. The Scorpion submarines, the Rafale fighter aircraft, these two programs are progressing well and in line with the commitments made by France. But as you have noted, within India there is some controversy about the Rafale. Between the Prime Minister and his political opposition. So the question of the volumes of aircraft will be an issue to be arrived at, to be solved by the internal Indian debate. But we have signed agreements. The words which have been used are very encouraging. We have both reasserted our determination to continue the framework of the agreements on the Scorpion submarines and the Rafale fighter aircraft, to proceed with new volumes of production in line with what had already been signed. You said that you are determined to develop links between French cinema and Bollywood. On a concrete level, what are you planning? There are two possible approaches. First of all, the shooting of Bollywood films in France. We have sites, we have famous, internationally well-known studios in France, and we have lovely countryside, and Bollywood has already shot a few films in France, and they were also are shooting in other European countries like Switzerland and in Australia as well. So our aim is to attract as many Bollywood shootings in France. That's why, for example, the managers of the Chambord Corporation, they are well equipped to welcome Bollywood filmmakers because they have very attractive countryside. And a few months ago, I also advertised the benefits of Chambord, but I think we need to develop. This will create jobs in France. The second thing is training. That's why I talked about the AFEMIS school. In terms of education and training, we have a school which is an international benchmark for training stage directors, film directors, script writers. So in all the professional skills of the cinema, we want to develop partnerships through cross exchanges, inter-exchanges between the French School of Cinema and the Indian School of Cinema. A last question? One last question? The interpreter apologizes, but he can't hear the question.
He's not going to answer this question?